You wake up to the sound of your alarm, the same sound you've heard every morning for years. You reach for your phone before your eyes are even fully open. You scroll, still half asleep, eyes scanning news you won't remember and images that won't nourish you. Then you rise, go through the routine, shower, clothes, coffee, commute. You show up, you do your job, you answer emails, you pretend to care. Then, you go home. You distract yourself with screens, eat food that barely touches your awareness, then scroll yourself into numbness until your body gives out and sleep takes you again. You call that life, but deep down, you know it isn't. There's a hollow in you, isn't there? A subtle ache, like something important went missing, and you can't quite name what it was. You think it's just stress, or maybe the economy, or maybe it's because you need a vacation, a partner, a change. But none of those things ever fill it, because it's not about what's missing outside you. It's about what was stolen from inside you, and more importantly, when. You see, you're not living, you're functioning, a machine with flesh and breath, yes, but still a machine. You wake up, but you're not awake. You speak, but your voice isn't yours. You make choices, but they're selections from a menu someone else created. Everything you do feels voluntary, but the truth is, you're operating on scripts you didn't write, scripts handed to you before you were old enough to understand you had the right to say no. You've been taught to perform, not to be, to achieve, not to feel, to comply, not to question. Every praise you received in childhood was tied to obedience. Sit still, do well, be nice. You learned early that love is conditional, that approval depends on performance. And so you molded yourself into something digestible, marketable, manageable. You sacrificed your essence for acceptance. And now here you are, years later, wondering why it feels like something is broken inside. But it's not broken, it's buried. You were trained for this life, not born into it. You didn't choose the systems you obey. You didn't choose the 9 to 5, the mortgage, the endless treadmill of productivity. Someone chose it for you. Systems, cultures, institutions, they all had a hand in shaping the cage that now looks like comfort. The scariest part is how normal it all feels, how invisible the bars are. You call it being responsible, you call it being an adult, but the truth is, you've been tamed. And that wild, untamed part of you, the part that once questioned everything, the part that danced without music and laughed without restraint, that part didn't die, it was silenced, slowly, strategically. Through routines that kept your head down, through rules that punished deviation, through distractions designed to dull your senses. You were never taught how to be free. You were only taught how to comply in prettier and more socially acceptable ways. But ask yourself, when was the last time you felt truly, unmistakably alive? Not just excited or entertained, but deeply connected to the pulse of existence. When was the last time you looked at the sky and felt awe instead of apathy? When did joy last surprise you, instead of needing to be scheduled, streamed, or purchased? Most people will never ask those questions. They're too busy surviving a life they didn't choose, clinging to routines that are killing them slowly. But something in you is starting to stir. Something in you knows this isn't all there is. You were told to chase success. You were told to chase love. You were told to chase happiness like it was somewhere out there, waiting for you if you just worked hard enough. But they never told you that happiness isn't something you catch, it's something you stop running from. And you've been running from yourself this whole time, not because you wanted to, but because someone taught you that who you really are isn't good enough. They never said it outright. They didn't have to. It was in the way they looked at you when you asked hard questions. It was in the way the classroom punished curiosity and rewarded memorization. It was in every movie, every commercial, every magazine cover whispering, "You're not enough. But if you buy this, or become this, maybe you will be." So you spent your life becoming thinner, smarter, richer, more impressive, more spiritual, more successful, in time, but never more you. And that's why the hunger never ends. Because nothing external can feed a soul that's starving for its own truth. And here's the twist. The system that keeps you chasing. It doesn't want you to wake up, it's built to reward distraction, not depth, because once you start questioning the script, the illusion cracks. Once you step back and see the machinery behind the curtain, you can never unsee it. They don't need to imprison your body if they can program your mind. They don't need to chain you if you've already chained yourself with beliefs they installed. They just need you busy enough, scared enough, numb enough, and obedient enough to never remember who you were before the world told you who to be. But here's the thing, the real you is still in there, beneath the layers of roles, responsibilities, and routines, beneath the weight of shoulds and musts. The real you remembers. Not in words, but in feelings, in moments of stillness, in dreams you abandoned but never fully forgot, in the aching pull toward something more, even if you can't name it. That pull is not a fantasy, it's a signal, it's your soul trying to wake you up, because there's a life beyond the loop, a world beyond the mask, a freedom beyond the programming. But you can't reach it by following the path they gave you. You have to unlearn, unplug, unravel. You have to risk discomfort for the sake of truth. It won't be easy. The system will push back. Your own mind will resist. But if you're reading this, if something inside you is still paying attention, then you've already started. And once you start to wake up, you can never go back to sleep the same way again. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will join you. But this journey isn't about them. It's about reclaiming the life you were meant to live before you were trained to settle for survival. You're not here to function. You're here to feel, to create, to question, to remember, and maybe, just maybe, to help others remember too. Because the moment you stop mistaking performance for presence, 7, the moment you stop confusing survival for living, that's the moment you begin to return. And that's when life, real life, begins. You were not born with beliefs, you were given them. From the moment you took your first breath, the world began whispering into your mind, not through words, but through patterns, images, tones, and reactions. The soft voice of your caregivers, the colors of the walls, the structure of days and nights, it all began shaping you long before you had a chance to ask why. Before you knew what a question was, the answers were already being installed. You weren't taught to think, you were taught to follow thoughts. They told you what to believe, not how to believe, what to want, not how to choose. And by the time you were old enough to speak, your inner voice had already been hijacked. Your wonder was gradually replaced with worry. Your imagination, once infinite, was trimmed to fit inside standardized boxes. You were rewarded for staying inside the lines and punished, subtly or directly, for coloring outside them. You were told that some things were right and others wrong. Some things were possible, others unrealistic. Some questions were welcome, others dangerous. And so the silent programming began, invisible, but all-encompassing. You didn't notice it because it didn't feel like a program. It felt like life. It felt like family. It felt like culture. But behind the comfort of familiarity, something else was happening. You were being sculpted into a version of yourself that fit into someone else's vision, someone else's system. They gave you a name, and you accepted it. They told you your history, and you believed it. They defined success, failure, happiness, and love for you, long before you ever had the chance to define them for yourself. They handed you a script, and you memorized it like your survival depended on it. Because it did. You didn't choose your language. You didn't choose your religion. You didn't choose your country, your school, your holidays, your moral code, or even your fears. They were given to you like clothes you were expected to wear forever, even if they never quite fit. And because the programming was quiet, because it came in lullabies, cartoons, school books, and bedtime stories, you didn't question it. You didn't see the code. You felt the comfort, the praise, the smiles when you obeyed, the cold silence when you didn't. By the time you were 7 years old, most of your core beliefs were already in place, not because you understood them, but because you absorbed them. Your brain, operating in a theta wave state, was soaking up reality like a sponge, and what it absorbed wasn't truth, it was instruction. This is what's real, this is what's possible, this is who you are, this is who you're not, this is what you must do to be loved, this is what you must avoid to be safe. None of it was said like a command. That's what makes it so powerful. It didn't feel like coercion, it felt like care. But make no mistake, it was installation. Installation of frameworks, filters, and fences. And once they were in place, you began to navigate your life inside their walls. You thought you were choosing, but you were reacting. You thought you were discovering, but you were remembering what they told you to remember. You thought your dreams were yours, but they were manufactured, designed to keep you moving along a path they built before you could crawl. It's hard to see it, because it's everywhere. In the cartoons that taught you who the hero was supposed to be. In the fairy tales that conditioned you to fear the unknown. In the classroom that taught you not to question the textbook. In the religion that told you only authority could save your soul. In the traditions that buried your intuition under repetition. You weren't raised, you were trained. Trained to sit, trained to please, trained to obey, trained to doubt yourself, to need approval, to silence your instincts and suppress your rage. Trained to chase success, as they define it. Trained to fear failure as they designed it. Trained to survive in a world that was never built for your truth, but for your submission. And when you felt different, when something inside you whispered that this couldn't be all there is, you were told you were strange, dramatic, sensitive, naive. You were told to be realistic, to grow up, to face the real world, ever, as if the world you were living in wasn't a simulation made of inherited beliefs. But the voice inside you never fully died. It went quiet, buried beneath layers of programming, 25, but it didn't disappear. It watched, it waited. And sometimes, late at night or in moments of crisis, it tried to speak. It asked you questions you were told not to ask. It nudged you when you followed the crowd. It stirred in you when your life felt empty, even though you were doing everything right. That inner voice wasn't broken. It was buried. And if you're hearing it now, if you feel a pressure rising beneath the surface, like something ancient trying to break free, then you're not crazy. You're remembering, because the truth is, the illusion is so complete, you forgot it was an illusion. You forgot that life isn't supposed to feel like this, like a loop. Like a predictable pattern of routines and expectations that leave no space for wonder. You forgot that you were meant to feel alive. And the reason you forgot is because they needed you to forget. They needed you to believe that what you were given was life, that conformity was wisdom, that productivity was purpose, that following the rules was virtue, that safety was the highest goal, but the cost of safety was your soul. This is the soft cage, not a prison with bars, but a world built on ideas you didn't choose, a world so carefully designed, it rewards you for staying asleep, it praises you for playing your part. It punishes you not with force, but with isolation, shame, disconnection. And so you internalized the rules. You became your own warden. You learned to silence your questions before anyone else could hear them. You learned to smile, even when you were dying inside. You learned to chase goals that never fed you, and to pretend they did. But now you're waking up. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. You're seeing the cracks. You're realizing that the life you've been living isn't yours. That your beliefs may not be true. That your fears may not be yours. That your path may not lead where your soul needs to go. And that realization is terrifying, because to question the program is to risk everything it gave you. The approval, the identity, the comfort, the certainty. But it's also the only way to become you again. You were not born to repeat someone else's story. You were not born to fit inside someone else's cage. You were not born to live as a function inside a machine that feeds on your awareness. You were born to remember. And the moment you begin to question the illusion is the moment you start to wake up. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He wasn't some fringe voice shouting from the shadows. He was one of them, a senior Pentagon official, a strategist, a man who had walked the inner halls of power. He had advised multiple US presidents. He had shaped policy. He was entrusted with national security, cyber warfare, chemical threats, and operations the public was never meant to know about. He had access, not just to information, but to the kind of systems most people don't even believe exist. His name was John Wheeler, and for a long time, he played by the rules, until suddenly, he didn't. It started quietly, like most unravelings do. He became distant, distracted. Friends and colleagues noticed a change in him, not a breakdown, but a shift. A kind of haunted presence, as if something had gotten inside his mind and wouldn't let go. He began talking about things that didn't make sense to them. He said he was being watched. He said they took his briefcase. He said something was coming, and that no one was ready for it. People dismissed it as stress. A man like that, so high up, so embedded in intelligence operations, ID, it wasn't unusual to carry the weight of classified knowledge. But this was different. This wasn't the paranoia of a man overwhelmed by secrets. This was the fear of someone who had seen too much. He said they were using things the public would never understand. That the battlefield wasn't just overseas anymore. That something dark had been turned inward. He mentioned energy-based systems, psychological weapons, and silent control mechanisms. He was piecing something together, something dangerous, something forbidden, and then, just days later, he vanished. The official story came fast, too fast. He was found in a landfill, crushed, broken, left among the garbage like discarded evidence. The reports were vague, the investigation shallow. They called it homicide, but no suspects were ever named. No security footage was ever released. No real questions were ever answered. It was cleaned up, sanitized, buried, and dismissed. Just another unfortunate ending for a brilliant man under stress. But anyone paying attention knew better. What happened to John Wheeler wasn't random. It wasn't some tragic accident. It was a message. And the message wasn't for the public. It was for people like you, people who are beginning to question, who are starting to feel that something about the world doesn't add up. His death wasn't just an ending, it was a warning. Because he didn't just hold positions of power, he held keys, access codes, intel that stretched across multiple agencies, black budget programs, and clandestine operations that never see the light of day. When a man like that starts talking, the silence that follows is never accidental. Wheeler had reached a threshold, a place where knowledge becomes a threat, not because of what he could do with it, but because of what it could awaken in others. He had started to see the layers behind the systems, the way perception was being shaped, the way fear was being used, the way control was being implemented not through laws or force, but through quiet compliance, engineered from the inside out. He wasn't ranting, he wasn't unstable, he was trying to talk, but the language of exposure is often mistaken for madness. That's how the system discredits you. Not by proving you wrong, but by making sure no one listens. Ask yourself, what kind of information would make a man, with that level of clearance, become so afraid? What would make him stumble through public spaces, disoriented, trying to reach someone, anyone, who might understand? What would make him believe that time was running out, that something was about to be unleashed? He had touched something most people aren't meant to touch, something buried beneath layers of classification, protected by silence and denial. And the moment he stopped being useful and started becoming unpredictable, he was erased. But his story didn't disappear. It lingers, not in the headlines, but in the quiet parts of your mind that wonder why you feel off in a world that tells you everything is fine. It lingers in the inconsistencies you've noticed, the gaps, the patterns, the feeling that something invisible is pressing down on you, making you tired, confused, detached. That isn't your imagination. That's the system Wheeler tried to expose. There's a reason his death was messy, rushed, unconvincing. It wasn't just an elimination, it was desperation. Like someone was trying to stop something before it spread, before he connected with the wrong person, before his words reached the right ears. Because the real danger wasn't what Wheeler knew, his what he saw coming. He understood that the tools once used for war had been repurposed, that the experiments weren't being run on enemies anymore, they were being run on civilians, on you, on your mind, your perception, your very sense of self. And he couldn't live with that, not because he was guilty, but because he knew. Knowing is dangerous. Because once you know, you can't participate blindly, you can't go back to sleep. And in a system that feeds on your unconscious compliance, Being awake is the most radical thing you can do. Wheeler didn't just die, he crossed a line. And when he crossed it, the machinery moved, silently, efficiently, just like it was designed to. You might be wondering, why him? Why now? The truth is, he was one of many. There's a pattern. People with access start connecting the dots. They see through the veil. They start talking. And then they vanish, or self-destruct, or get written off as unstable. You've seen the stories. Maybe you ignored them. Maybe you told yourself there was nothing to see. But there is. And now you're starting to see it too. This isn't about fear. It's about awareness. About seeing how the game is played. About recognizing that the illusion of freedom is easier to sell than the truth of control. Because when you believe you're free, you don't ask why you feel so dead inside. You don't question the systems that drain you. You don't wonder why your joy is gone, your mind is scattered, your energy is low. But Wheeler questioned it. And when he looked too closely, they made sure his story ended in silence. Only it didn't, because you're here now, hearing the echo. And the question that matters isn't who killed him, it's why he had to die. And what he knew that you're only just beginning to remember. He wasn't paranoid, he was paying attention. They want you to believe he broke down, that his mind slipped, that his fears weren't grounded in reality, that the man wandering the streets wasn't once a trusted voice in the highest rooms of power. But what if the truth is darker than that? What if he didn't lose his mind? What if he gained clarity? What if what looked like unraveling was actually awakening? He had been deep in it for years, in rooms you've never heard of, with budgets that don't exist on paper. With operations buried behind layers of language so complex that even the people signing the documents didn't know what they were approving. The kind of work that doesn't show up in headlines or history books. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much, too sensitive, too volatile, too true. You've heard whispers of it, haven't you? Psychological operations, mind control experiments, energy weapons, behavioral engineering. Not science fiction, not theory, but programs, funded and real, hidden in plain sight under the guise of defense. The kind of tools originally designed to disorient enemies overseas. But what happens when they're turned inward? What happens when the battlefield becomes your mind? He saw it. He saw the shift. His access gave him the view most people never get. And what he saw wasn't a country preparing to defend itself. It was a system preparing to control its own people. Not through tanks, not through bullets, but through silence, through signals, through slow, invisible warfare that didn't need to break the body to destroy the spirit. He spoke to a few people about it, carefully at first. Then, more urgently, he said things that sounded impossible. Frequency weapons that alter emotional states. Microwave technologies that influence behavior. Invisible fields that create fatigue, passivity, confusion. At first, they nodded politely. Then they distanced themselves. Then they pretended not to hear. But he wouldn't let it go. He started compiling notes, sketches, fragments of conversations. He traced contracts and found familiar names buried in classified projects that had no oversight. He pieced together timelines, cross-referenced events with documented behavior shifts in the population. He started to realize the scope of what was unfolding, and how little time there was left before it scaled beyond control. He described it as a kind of silent net, not made of wires or fiber optics, but of resonance, a grid that ran beneath reality, one you couldn't see or touch, but you could feel it if you got quiet enough. A subtle distortion in the air, a hum in the background of your life, not loud, but present, constant, like your energy was being gently bent, again and again, until you aligned with something that wasn't you. People said he was obsessed, that he was chasing shadows. But obsession and urgency look similar when you're the only one who sees the fire. And then, things got stranger. He started noticing people following him, conversations stopping when he entered a room, files disappearing, warnings from people who didn't want to be named. He said his briefcase was stolen, not for what was inside, but for what it connected to. He said the threads were converging, that something was coming, and once it arrived, it would be too late to warn anyone. Then came the incident. You've probably read about it in passing, if at all. A body in a landfill, a former high-ranking government official, found crushed, dumped, anonymous, but no suspects. No serious investigation, no headlines, just a vague reference to possible mental instability and a quiet burial. Case closed. But it wasn't random, it wasn't meaningless, and it wasn't madness. He died because he remembered too much, because he didn't look away, because the closer he got to the source, the more they needed to make sure no one followed. You see, he wasn't just sounding an alarm, he was revealing a map of tools used not to protect, but to pacify. Programs designed not for war, but for influence. Black-budget technologies created to suppress dissent before it even formed. He spoke about systems that worked on resonance, technologies that disrupted natural rhythms, weakened intuition, and installed a kind of synthetic fog into the consciousness of entire populations. They call them non-lethal weapons. But that depends on your definition of death. Is it death if your creativity is gone? Is it death if your desire for truth evaporates? Is it death if you forget how to feel? These are not accidents. They are engineered outcomes. And he saw the connection, APT, between mass apathy, emotional collapse, rising mental health crises, and the quiet deployment of tools that no one voted for. He understood the power of subtlety. You don't need to kill people to control them. You just need to wear them down until they forget what it means to be alive. He knew that these programs had evolved past crude experiments, that they now operated with surgical precision, tuning the frequency of a population like adjusting a radio dial, lowering the signal of awareness, creativity, courage, and replacing it with compliance. Routine, numbness, that was the real war. And he was trying to warn you, but truth has a cost. Especially the kind of truth that can't be unseen. He wasn't ranting, he was leaking. Every time he spoke, he bled pieces of a system they never wanted public. And every time he tried to explain, he looked a little more unstable. Not because he was wrong, but because the truth twisted inside him. Because when you see the machine from the inside, and everyone else calls it the sky, you start to fracture under the weight of isolation. He had been trained to build systems, and now he saw what those systems were really for. He had helped design a cage, only to realize it wasn't for the enemy. It was for everyone, including you. And maybe that's the most haunting part of his story. Not the way he died, but the way his truth was buried with him, dismissed as delusion, forgotten as coincidence, smoothed over by a narrative that said, he was just another man who lost his grip. But what if he didn't lose his grip? What if he gripped reality too tightly, and it snapped? What if his warnings weren't ramblings? What if they were keys? What if everything he saw was never meant to be understood by the public, because understanding it would mean you'd stop obeying? That's the risk of waking up, because once you see the system behind the surface, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending the world is what they told you it was. You start to notice patterns, signals, shifts in your mood that you didn't choose, fatigue that has no cause, anxiety that comes from nowhere. You start to feel the hum, and when you do, you start to remember. You remember what he tried to tell you, and you realize he wasn't unstable, he was awake. Why would someone like him, a man with clearance, influence, and connections that reached the highest levels of government, become so visibly, undeniably terrified? Why would a man who had spent his entire life managing threats and building defenses suddenly stumble through public streets, looking over his shoulder, confused, panicked, desperate? What did he see that shattered the illusion of safety, even for someone at the top? The answer is simple, but most people will never accept it, because the threat isn't what we've been told. The real war isn't being fought overseas. It isn't between nations. It isn't about bombs or bullets or drones. It's not external at all. It's internal. It's inside your mind. It's inside your thoughts. It's inside you. The battlefield is awareness. The target is consciousness. And the casualties? They're people who never even realized a war was being waged in the first place. That's what made him dangerous. Not because he had weapons. Not because he was planning something. But because he saw the structure. He saw the invisible system. And when you see it, truly see it, you don't just get scared, you get haunted. Because suddenly, every normal part of life starts to look like theater. Every headline, every commercial, every public panic, every trend, they stop being random and start looking coordinated, designed, intentional, and you realize you've been inside the cage the whole time, calling it freedom. It's not a cage made of steel. It's not enforced with guards or fences. It doesn't have to be. The best kind of prison is the one you don't know you're in. The kind where you're allowed to decorate your cell, choose your furniture, even call it home. The kind where you're given just enough comfort to distract you from the fact that you're being watched, influenced, shaped. You're not shackled, so you assume you're free. But freedom has nothing to do with movement. It has everything to do with mind space. And your mind space has been colonized. This war isn't loud. It doesn't look like what you expect. There are no parades of tanks, no sirens wailing through the streets. It's silent, sophisticated, precision-engineered. It uses tools that don't bruise your skin, they fracture your attention. It doesn't kick down your door, it whispers through your feed. It doesn't censor you with force, it rewires you with distraction. And the most terrifying part is that it works. You've felt it, haven't you? The strange heaviness that follows you even on good days, the constant fog in your mind, the inability to focus for more than a few seconds. The apathy that creeps in when you try to care, the exhaustion that no sleep can fix. You think it's your fault. You blame your schedule, your diet, your bad habits. But what if it isn't you? What if it's them? What if your mind is under siege, and you didn't even know it? There are technologies now, some hidden, some public, designed to alter mood, influence behavior, suppress thought, and shape perception. Not someday, now. They've been tested, patented, integrated. The architecture is already built. You're walking through it every day, breathing it in, syncing your rhythms to its frequency. It's in your phone. It's in your home. It's in the grid itself. But because it's invisible, you don't question it. And because it doesn't hurt, you don't resist it. You go along, you adapt, you get tired, you start forgetting what passion felt like. You stop questioning why you've been stuck in the same emotional loop for years, and you call it adulthood. You call it realism. You call it life. But it's not life. It's sedation, and it's spreading. You were never meant to see it. That's why it's built the way it is, dawn, undone, one, subtle, ambient, woven into the very fabric of what you believe is reality. You were taught to look for control in obvious places, politicians, laws, police. But the real power doesn't need to control your body, it just needs to shape your thoughts. Because if they can influence your perception, they don't need to force you to obey. You'll do it automatically. You'll police yourself. You'll doubt your own intuition. You'll turn on those who step outside the norm. You'll mock the people who ask the wrong questions. And you'll believe you're being logical. That's how they win. The war isn't against rebels or dissenters, it's against awareness itself. Because awareness leads to choice. Choice leads to autonomy. Autonomy leads to disruption. And the system cannot tolerate disruption. It's built on predictability. It thrives on routine. It needs you to stay within the rails, think within the script, and respond within a narrow range of emotions. Anything outside that range is labeled dangerous, unstable, or delusional. And that's exactly what happened to the ones who saw too much. They didn't go crazy. They woke up. And in a world this carefully constructed, waking up looks like madness. You're told you're free, yet you've never questioned the systems that define your identity. You're told you're safe, yet you're drowning in anxiety and fear. You're told you have control, yet your moods, your attention, your desires are being manipulated by machines that know you better than you know yourself. So tell me, is that freedom? The cage is not physical, it's informational, emotional, psychological, and it doesn't need guards when everyone inside is too distracted to realize they're locked in. They've perfected the art of ambient control, the kind that doesn't provoke rebellion because it never feels oppressive. It feels normal. It feels reasonable. You accept it because everyone else does. And slowly, you forget what it felt like to be fully alive. But you were fully alive once, weren't you? Maybe when you were a child, maybe in some fleeting moment of clarity, maybe during a dream that left you shaken. You remember it, vaguely. A time when the world felt enchanted, mysterious, open. That wasn't an illusion, that was reality, before the layers were laid over it, before the conditioning, the programming, the slow erosion of your inner fire. This is what the cage steals from you, not just freedom, but possibility. The ability to imagine something else, the courage to act on it, the hunger to seek. And once that's gone, the system no longer needs to fight you. You'll stay inside voluntarily. That's why he was afraid. That's why he unraveled. Because he saw the cage from the outside, and he saw the billions living inside it without knowing. He understood that the war was never about land or politics. It was about consciousness, about the human spirit, about your ability to wake up and see beyond the veil. And now you're seeing it too. Not all at once, not clearly. But something is shifting, isn't it? A crack in the story, a discomfort in the familiar, a pull towards something real, something buried, something true. You're not crazy, you're not broken, you're just beginning to notice the walls. The cage you couldn't see is becoming visible, and once you see it, really see it, you can't go back to pretending it's not there. Just because your eyes are open doesn't mean you're conscious. You can see the world, you can move through it, interact with it, respond to it. But that doesn't mean you're awake, it doesn't mean you're aware. That's the trap, thinking that presence of vision equals presence of self. It doesn't. The truth is, you can live an entire life with your eyes wide open and your soul completely asleep. And that's what most people are doing. They wake up, but they don't wake up. They get out of bed, scroll through a glowing screen, respond to a few messages, pour coffee into the same mug, drive the same route, speak the same phrases to the same people. And they call that living. But is it? Is that what you came here for? You've mistaken movement for meaning, productivity for purpose, routine for reality. You follow a schedule, not your intuition. You obey clocks and calendars, but ignore the pull in your chest that says, this isn't it. You go through the motions with precision, but the spark is gone. You don't feel deeply. You don't question loudly. You don't pause long enough to notice the numbness creeping in. And even if you did, you wouldn't have time to fix it. There's always something next, something urgent, something that can't wait. This is what they've normalized: emotional deadness, disguised as maturity, disconnection, masked as discipline, apathy sold as acceptance. They told you that growing up meant settling down, calming down, shutting up. So you did. You dimmed your light to fit the room. You lowered your frequency to match the noise. And now, you wonder why everything feels dull. It's because you're not here. Not really. Your body's in the room, but your consciousness is fractured, divided between obligations, distractions, and the fear of falling behind. You're everywhere and nowhere, always scrolling, always reacting, always consuming, but never creating, never reflecting, never feeling. You think this is just modern life, but it's not. It's a program. You were taught to chase the next thing, the next upgrade, the next milestone. You were rewarded for performance. You were rewarded for performance, not presence. You were conditioned to believe that stillness is laziness, that boredom is a problem, that silence is awkward. So now, when your soul tries to whisper, you drown it out with noise. You can't hear your truth anymore, because you're addicted to the distraction. And the scariest part? You didn't choose this. You adapted to survive it. You bent yourself into shapes that fit the system. You sacrificed awareness for approval. You gave up presence for productivity. You stopped noticing the world around you, not because it stopped being beautiful, but because you stopped looking. You see, the world didn't get dull. You did. You numbed yourself just enough to keep going. Just enough to not feel the ache in your chest. Just enough to call this life, even when it doesn't feel like living. But that numbness, that fatigue, that emptiness you can't explain, it's not a personal failure, it's a symptom. A symptom of spiritual starvation. A symptom of unconscious survival. You've been surviving so long, you forgot what it feels like to thrive. You've been reacting so long, you forgot what it feels like to choose. You've been asleep so long, you started dreaming you were awake. But you're not. Not fully. You might think you're awake because you're functional. You meet deadlines. You remember birthdays. You answer emails and do laundry and pay bills. You nod at the right times. You say the right things. But none of that is consciousness. That's just programming. That's just the script. Consciousness is something else entirely. It's raw, it's present, it's inconvenient. It doesn't let you sleepwalk. It doesn't let you lie to yourself. It doesn't care about appearances. It demands truth, and truth is uncomfortable. Truth is the feeling in your gut that says, "This isn't who I am." Truth is the inner scream that gets louder every time you ignore it. Truth is the reason your joy disappeared the moment you stopped questioning. And when you begin to wake up, really wake up, it doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels like grief. Grief for the years you spent chasing illusions. Grief for the parts of you that were silenced. Grief for the life you lived on autopilot. That grief is sacred. It means something inside you is still alive. It means your soul hasn't given up on you. It means the spark is still there, buried under all the programming, waiting to be reignited. But here's the trap. The world will convince you that the symptoms of your awakening are symptoms of illness. They'll tell you that your sensitivity is weakness, that your burnout is laziness, that your confusion is failure, that your disinterest in the rat race is depression. They'll offer you pills, numbness, more noise, a new goal to chase, a new product to buy, anything to keep you from feeling the truth that's breaking through the cracks. But don't believe them. What you're feeling isn't sickness, it's remembrance. You are remembering what it means to feel. You are remembering what it means to know. You are remembering that you are not here to function. You are here to awaken. The world around you is designed to keep you busy, because busy people don't rebel. Busy people don't reflect. Busy people don't realize they're sleepwalking through a life they never consciously chose. And if you ever stop, even for a moment, if you breathe, if you listen, if you allow silence to speak, the program glitches. The spell begins to fade. You begin to see, not with your eyes, but with your presence. You notice how often you've been reacting instead of responding. How often you've been consuming instead of creating. How often you've been avoiding instead of healing. You begin to reclaim your awareness, piece by piece, and with it, your power. That's the first step, seeing the sleep, feeling the fog, acknowledging the distance between your existence and your essence. That's where the real awakening begins. And no, it's not instant. It's not glamorous. It's not always gentle, but it's real. And once it starts, once you get even a glimpse of what it means to be fully here, you can never unsee it. You can't go back. The dream won't feel safe anymore. The loop won't satisfy you. The false high of productivity will leave you empty, because you'll know what it's been replacing. Presence, truth, you. You are not here to sleep through this life. You are here to wake. And the moment you realize that, the moment you stop mistaking your open eyes for an awakened soul, everything begins to shift. The fog doesn't disappear all at once, but it lifts. Enough for you to take the next step. Enough for you to question. Enough for you to feel. And in that feeling, in that raw, uncomfortable, undeniable awareness, coming teen, you begin to come back to life. You're not shackled. There are no bars around you, no handcuffs, no soldiers patrolling your neighborhood. You wake up when you want. You walk where you please. You speak without consequence, or so you think. And because of that, you tell yourself, you're free. But real control doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't need weapons when it has whispers. It doesn't require violence when it has influence. The most powerful kind of control is the kind that makes you believe you're not being controlled at all. You weren't taught to obey through threats. You were conditioned through repetition, through exposure, through reward. They didn't need to scare you into silence. They just had to distract you into comfort. And slowly, over years, over decades, your inner compass was rewritten, not erased, just bent, slightly, silently, so subtly that you thought your beliefs were your own. You thought your dreams were authentic. You thought your fears were personal, but they were planted, shaped, and reinforced, until they grew into structures inside you. Control today doesn't wear a uniform, it wears a friendly face, a trending sound, a suggested video. It's built into the rhythm of your life, the timing of your notifications, the color palette of your apps. You don't even notice how it works, because it's designed to blend in, to feel like your choice. And that's what makes it so effective. When you're convinced that you're making your own decisions, there's no resistance, there's no rebellion. You stay inside the lines because you think you drew them. They never had to force you to comply. They just had to make you afraid of being different. And that started early. In school, when standing out meant punishment. In friendships, when questioning the group made you a target. In family systems, where love was given in exchange for conformity. You learned fast. Don't ask too much. Don't stand too tall. Don't speak too loud. Blend in, fit the mold, stay safe. So you did. You learned to dim yourself. You learned to hide your truth, not because someone told you to, but because every time you didn't, the world pushed back. And that pushback taught you something dangerous. It's easier to obey than to be authentic. It's safer to conform than to question. And once you internalized that, the system no longer needed to manage you. You managed yourself. This isn't some dystopian theory. This is your daily life. Look around. Everyone moving in the same rhythm, chasing the same markers of success, posting the same kinds of thoughts. You were told, it's connection. But it's performance. You're not sharing who you are. You're curating a version of yourself that's most acceptable, most palatable, most liked. And every heart, every comment, every follower trains you to stay in line. You think algorithms just show you what you like? No. They shape what you like. They reinforce what's acceptable and starve what isn't. Over time, your digital world becomes an echo chamber of your own conditioning. Not because it reflects your truth, but because it reflects your programming. And so the cage tightens, not with force, but with familiarity, not with bars, but with patterns. This is psychological engineering. And it's everywhere. You're told how to feel about the world before you even process it. Headlines don't inform you, they frame you. They tell you what to fear, what to mock, what to defend. And you comply, reflexively, without asking if it's your voice speaking or someone else's. That's how deep it goes. The control isn't on the surface. It's woven into your perception, into your emotional reactions, into your sense of self. And you don't feel it, do you? That's the most disturbing part. You don't feel controlled. You feel tired. You feel anxious. You feel numb. You feel disconnected. But you don't trace those feelings back to the system. You blame yourself. You say you're burnt out. You say you need better habits, more discipline, less screen time. And while all those things might be true, they miss the point entirely, because the problem isn't just inside you, it's all around you, and it's been designed that way. They don't need to imprison you when your own thoughts keep you in place. They don't need to censor you when you've learned to self-censor. They don't need to hide information when they can drown it in noise. You are surrounded by signals, by frequencies, by digital energies that you can't see, but that shape you, not metaphorically, literally. There are patents, devices, protocols, tools that can induce fatigue, change mood, suppress emotional intensity. And these tools don't need to be aimed at you like a weapon. They can operate in the background, ambient and unnoticed. Just enough to keep you off balance, just enough to keep you passive. This isn't a movie, it's not a future threat, it's a present reality. And still, you walk through it believing that what you feel is normal, that your lack of motivation is just personality, that your restlessness is just stress, that your hopelessness is just the world being hard. But what if none of that is true? What if your emotional baseline has been calibrated downward over time, like a slow descent that you never noticed because it happened one day at a time? That's how they do it, not with shock, but with saturation. They saturate you with noise until silence feels terrifying. They saturate you with opinions until your own voice becomes indistinct. They saturate you with images, with ads, with stimulation, until your nervous system gives up. And then, in that dazed, weakened state, They offer you comfort, more content, more things to buy, more rules to follow, more meaning substitutes, and you take it, because it feels safe, because everyone else is taking it, because questioning it makes you feel crazy, because the world has trained you to fear being the one who sees clearly when no one else does. But someone has to. Someone has to ask what happens when a species is flooded with signals that numb its spirit. Someone has to ask why depression, anxiety, and attention disorders are exploding in a world that's supposed to be more connected, more informed, more enlightened than ever before. Someone has to ask who benefits from a population that feels too exhausted to resist. And maybe that someone is you, because if you've read this far, it means something inside you hasn't been fully silenced. It means your awareness, even if flickering, even if faint, is still yours. And that's the beginning of something powerful. It's the beginning of taking your mind back. It's the moment you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What have they done to me?" It's the moment the spell starts to break, and once it breaks, you begin to remember who you were before the world told you what to become. You remember how it felt to feel clear, to feel real, to feel alive, and that memory is your map home. This war isn't fought with guns, it isn't loud, it doesn't leave rubble or smoke, there are no sirens, no broadcasts, no front lines, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Because while you go about your life, walking through your neighborhood, scrolling on your phone, watching TV before bed, it's already happening. Not around you, inside you. They call it non-lethal warfare, as if the absence of blood means the absence of harm, but they've redefined the battlefield. It's no longer about territory or resources, it's about your mind, your perception, your focus, because if they can shape those, they don't need to take anything by force. You'll give it away freely, believing it was always yours to surrender. It started with technologies created for enemies, foreign adversaries, psychological operations designed to disorient, manipulate, confuse. Ways to suppress revolts, to weaken morale, to induce fatigue and fear without laying a hand on anyone. But over time, the line blurred. And when you build a tool that powerful, the temptation to use it doesn't stop at borders. Eventually, the target becomes the population itself. You won't hear it, you won't see it, that's the brilliance of it. These frequencies operate beneath awareness, they don't shout, they hum. They slip through walls, into devices, into public infrastructure, broadcast towers, Wi-Fi signals, satellites. You've been told they're for connection, for convenience. But what if some of those signals are doing something else? This isn't about conspiracy. This is about confirmed patents, declassified documents, research published under the guise of national security, neurological entrainment, electromagnetic frequency manipulation, crowd control systems that can agitate or pacify without physical contact, all real, all tested, all deployed. These signals don't make you bleed, they make you tired. They cloud your thinking, they flatten your emotions, they scramble your attention just enough to keep you distracted, overwhelmed, numb. You might blame your exhaustion on poor sleep, your mood swings on hormones, your inability to focus on stress. But what if it's being orchestrated? What if your biology is being tuned like an instrument, not to express your truth, but to keep you in a low, predictable rhythm? This is not about physical control, it's about cognitive real estate. The war is for your focus, because where your attention goes, your energy flows. And if they can direct that energy toward trivialities, toward fear, toward entertainment, then they own you without you even noticing. Ask yourself, why is it getting harder to sit in silence? Why is your mind constantly racing? Why does it feel impossible to finish a book, meditate, or even hold a single thought for more than 30 seconds? You've been conditioned to believe that's just modern life. But what if it's interference? What if it's designed? There are frequencies that induce anxiety, others that disrupt sleep cycles, others still that can create disassociation, a feeling of being disconnected from your own life. These are not theories, they're measurable, and they've been studied for decades, long before the average person had a smartphone in their pocket or a smart device in every room. You're not paranoid. You're saturated. You are constantly surrounded by invisible fields, Wi-Fi, 5G, Bluetooth, smart meters, surveillance devices, digital assistants, Dizzyuel, all pulsing with frequencies you didn't consent to, but live within every day. And while not all of them are weaponized, the cumulative effect on your nervous system, your brainwaves, your biochemistry is undeniable. But the real weapon isn't the signal, it's your belief that it's harmless. That's how they win. Because if you don't believe you're under attack, you won't defend yourself. You won't question your fatigue. You won't notice your attention span evaporating. You'll just adjust, accept, shrink your focus to match the glitching signal. You'll start to live in short bursts, a video here, a headline there, a fragment of a thought before the next distraction pulls you away. And soon, you won't even remember what depth felt like. This is the war on consciousness. It doesn't need to erase your thoughts. It just needs to flood them. It doesn't need to silence your voice. It just needs to drown it in noise. You're not being silenced. You're being overstimulated to the point of surrender. Think about how easily moods shift now. How entire crowds can be agitated or subdued with nothing more than light, sound, or frequency. Protests dispersed without force. Masses pacified without a word. You don't need riot police when you have remote emotional modulation. You don't need curfews when you can induce collective apathy. And you don't need to control everyone, you just need to control enough. Enough to keep the rest afraid to question, too tired to rebel, too foggy to think clearly, and if they ever get close to waking up, flood them with more stimulation, more news, more fear, more dopamine, until they sink back into the loop. It's not a cage, it's a field, not built with bars, but with bandwidth. And the worst part? It's self-reinforcing. The more fragmented your attention becomes, the more dependent you are on the systems that caused it. The more dysregulated your emotions, the more you reach for screens, substances, distractions. The more hollow your inner world becomes, the more you chase meaning in external noise, and that's when they have you. Because now, you're not just being influenced, you're complicit in your own suppression. You don't even realize the cage is there, because it's made of your own habits, your own patterns, your own reluctance to pause and feel what's underneath the noise. And even if you did pause, even if you managed to cut through the static, would you recognize the silence anymore? Would you trust it, or would it terrify you? This is why they don't need to censor you with force. They just need to keep you vibrating at a frequency too low to care, too low to notice, too low to resist. And what about healing? What about elevation? What happens when you try to raise your vibration? To meditate, to detox, to align with clarity and truth? That's when the interference increases. That's when the distractions multiply. That's when your phone buzzes, your thoughts scatter, your environment gets louder. It's not an accident, it's resistance. Because rising in consciousness weakens the field. And they know that, because they've studied it. Because the only thing more dangerous than a conscious individual is a conscious collective. That's why they built the noise, to keep you apart, disconnected from each other, and from yourself. Because connection creates coherence, and coherence creates clarity, and clarity breaks the spell. But the spell only works if you stay asleep, if you keep believing that your exhaustion is normal, that your disconnection is a personal failing, that your inability to focus is just poor discipline. It's not. It's a symptom of the signal. But symptoms can be decoded, and signals can be disrupted. You don't need to fight fire with fire. You just need to remember your natural frequency. Because once you tune back into it, once you feel the truth of who you are beneath the distortion, the field begins to shift. And the war starts to lose you. Every morning, without question, you re-enter the grid. You wake up and almost instantly resume the loop, guided not by conscious decision, but by embedded momentum. You follow a script you didn't write, one handed to you by generations of repetition, and reinforced through culture, media, and expectation. You check your phone, you respond to messages. You look at the time, already aware of the pressure to keep pace with a rhythm you didn't set. You get dressed, not to express who you are, but to fit a role. You commute, Enter a building, log in, clock in, smile, perform, and count the hours until you're released. You call it work, you call it life, but you rarely stop to ask, who built the structure you move through? Your life is not random. It's patterned. It's carved into place by a grid of rituals, routines, and symbols so deeply ingrained that they operate below your awareness. You think you're navigating freely, but you're not. You're moving through predetermined corridors, psychological hallways, carefully engineered to shape your mind, your choices, your values. The 9-to-5 job isn't just an economic structure, it's a behavioral conditioning program. It teaches you when to wake, when to eat, when to produce, and when to rest. It regulates your sense of time, your self-worth, your identity. It fragments your energy into predictable blocks, leaving little room for rebellion or exploration. And the scariest part is how natural it feels. You were born into a system that didn't ask for your permission. It trained you before you could speak. Through rewards and punishments, through repetition and ritual, it sculpted your perception of what is normal. The Pledge of Allegiance, said before you understood what allegiance meant. The bell system in school, training you to respond to authority cues. Holidays rooted in consumerism, each one a carefully crafted event meant to extract your attention, your money, and your emotional energy. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, limited time offers. Loyalty points, sale countdowns. These aren't just marketing strategies, they're psychological levers designed to create urgency, dependence, and the illusion of choice. Look deeper. Symbols are everywhere, not just logos, but energetic sigils with historical power embedded in advertising, architecture, currency. They're not arbitrary, they're chosen. They communicate with your subconscious in a language you were never taught, but one your energy system understands instinctively. You pass by them every day without noticing, but they notice you. They imprint, they nudge, they reinforce. You are being shaped, even in your silence. You scroll your newsfeed thinking you're catching up with the world. But the feed isn't neutral. It's an algorithmic mirror, not reflecting truth but feeding back what keeps you engaged, afraid, outraged, and distracted. Your emotional state is being harvested and looped. Your reactions become data points. Your attention becomes a commodity. And over time, your worldview narrows, shaped not by truth but by repetition. You begin to think in headlines, feel in hashtags, and process life in digestible bites of emotional stimulation. That's not information. That's manipulation dressed as connection. Your routine is not just a schedule, it's a trance. Wake up, caffeinate, work, entertain, sleep, repeat, the same places, the same routes, the same conversations, the same mental loops. And every time you think about stepping out of it, something pulls you back. Fear of instability, fear of judgment, fear of losing what little comfort you've been allowed. That fear isn't accidental. It's programmed. The grid keeps you busy enough to stay tired, distracted enough to stay numb, and dependent enough to never ask what's outside it. But what if it's not all just random noise? What if the structure of your daily life is actually a sophisticated, energetic design meant to keep your consciousness from expanding? What if every symbol, every ritual, every repetitive behavior is an anchor, not to stabilize you, but to keep you from drifting too far into truth? You weren't meant to just survive this existence. You were meant to awaken through it. But awakening requires interruption. It requires stillness. It requires contrast. And the grid was built to prevent that. It mimics progress. It gives you promotions, upgrades, achievements. It celebrates you for staying inside the loop, but it never asks you to see the loop, because the moment you do, the illusion weakens. You think you're making decisions, but your options were already filtered. You think you're expressing yourself, but your language has been shaped by external culture. You think you're safe because everything feels familiar, but that familiarity is the very mechanism of control. You're not free when your every move follows an inherited map. You're just comfortably caged. The idea that you're a sovereign being has been reduced to weekend hobbies, temporary escapes, spiritual quotes on your feed. You're allowed to feel spiritual as long as you don't live like you're actually sovereign. Because real sovereignty doesn't fit inside the grid. It disrupts it. It questions it. It creates its own rhythm. And you know what happens to those who try to break free? They're called lazy, unstable, crazy, rebellious, unrealistic. The system defends itself through you, through your trained responses, through the internalized judgment you direct at anyone who steps out of line. You were taught to ridicule those who question the maze, not because they're wrong, but because their freedom threatens your illusion of security. This is the maze you never agreed to enter, the one that was built before you were born, the one you were conditioned to believe is all there is. And now, somewhere inside you, a deeper part is beginning to stir, a part that remembers something different, a part that knows there is more, a part that can sense the false edges of this world. You've been walking in circles, mistaking movement for growth, routine for purpose, success for fulfillment. But what if none of those things mean what you were taught they mean? What if your job is not to win the game, but to realize it's a game? What if the whole structure was designed not to empower you, but to keep you spinning, efficient, productive, docile? You were never meant to be another piece in the machine. You were meant to remember the machine, to see its architecture, to feel your way through its frequency, to step back and ask the forbidden question, what would my life look like if I wasn't inside someone else's design? And in asking that, you begin to disrupt the grid, not with violence, not with protest, but with awareness. And awareness is dangerous to the system. Because the moment you see the maze, the walls lose power, the scripts lose hold, the rituals lose their hypnotic pull. You begin to reclaim your energy, you begin to rewrite your rhythm, you begin to wake up not into the system, but out of it. And when that happens, the grid trembles. Not because you've overthrown it, but because you've become immune to its control. You stop reacting, you start creating, you stop following, you start listening, not to the noise, but to the signal beneath it. Because the maze only works if you forget it's a maze. And the moment you remember, you're no longer trapped. You're free. You're not being killed. You're being numbed. Not all death looks like a body on the floor. Some death comes in silence, in slow, creeping forgetfulness. It doesn't crash into your world like a scream. It hums beneath your life like a lullaby. Every time you reach for your phone without thinking, every time you scroll past your own thoughts, every time you silence your inner voice just to survive the day, a part of you disappears, not violently, not dramatically, but piece by piece, numbed into non-existence. This is how they do it now. Not with weapons, but with noise. Not with blood, but with algorithms. They don't need to make you afraid anymore. They just need to keep you busy, distracted, tethered to 100 little mechanisms that feed your brain just enough stimulation to keep you from asking why you feel so hollow, so detached, so empty, and you probably don't remember when it started. That's the point. Distraction isn't a door that slams shut, it's a drip, a tap, a quiet substitution, one notification here, one dopamine hit there. One video, one sale, one text, one excuse. It begins as an option, then becomes a habit, then becomes who you are. You think you're choosing, but you're reacting. You think you're informed, but you're overstimulated. You think you're connected, but you're isolated inside a perfectly curated illusion. You don't even remember what it feels like to be with yourself, without a device, without a screen, without checking for something new, something urgent, something important. You've been trained to avoid stillness like it's a threat. But it's not stillness that's dangerous. It's what you might hear if you let yourself sink into it. The noise keeps you from noticing the numbness. The numbness keeps you from noticing the death. And the death? It's the slow erosion of your essence, of your presence, of the part of you that remembers what it means to be fully here. The apocalypse you were warned about isn't coming in a mushroom cloud or a fiery sky. It's already here, quiet, soft, gradual. It looks like disinterest, like burnout, like being too tired to care about anything real. It looks like endless scrolling, half-finished books, shallow conversations, and nights spent chasing sleep that never feels restful. It looks like a generation forgetting how to feel, and being told that's normal. They've convinced you that distraction is a lifestyle, that overwhelm is ambition, that exhaustion is success, and because everyone around you is doing it, you stopped questioning it, you adapted. You adjusted. You learned how to function inside a broken rhythm, thinking it was just part of being an adult. But the truth is, you are being erased. Slowly, gently, conveniently. They don't need to silence you, they just need to flood you with content. They don't need to imprison you, they just need to keep you chasing updates. They don't need to kill your body, they just need to paralyze your spirit. And it's working, because every day, you feel less, you desire less, you dream less, you might smile, you might laugh, you might even look productive, but underneath the surface, there's a vacancy, a silence where your aliveness used to live, and you can't quite explain it, you just know something is missing. You keep thinking one more scroll, one more show, one more hour, one more week will bring the spark back, but it never does, because the thing you're missing isn't out there, it's you. Your depth, your connection, your clarity. And the longer you stay distracted, the harder it becomes to find your way back. They've replaced your sacred rituals with consumption, your moments of reflection with reaction, your stillness with stimulation, your longing with low-grade panic, your purpose with performance. And it's not a mistake, it's a design. Because an awakened mind can't be controlled, a present soul can't be sold to, a focused heart is dangerous to systems that thrive on fear, urgency, and impulse. And that's why they need you distracted. Because the moment you see what's happening, really see it, the illusion breaks, the game collapses, the system loses its grip, and suddenly, you're no longer a consumer. You become a creator, a disruptor, a conscious being who remembers what it feels like to taste life in its raw, unfiltered truth. But to get there, you have to break the spell. You have to unplug from the artificial rush and feel the withdrawal. You have to sit in the boredom, the discomfort, the silence. You have to let your nervous system remember what it means to rest without sedation, to feel without distraction, to exist without performing. And that's not easy, because the machine has trained you to need the noise. You've grown addicted to the very thing that's draining you. You crave the thing that's killing your aliveness. And the hardest part of waking up is realizing how deeply you've participated in your own numbing. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll start noticing how fast the world moves, not because it needs to, but because it keeps you from noticing yourself. You'll start hearing the desperation in your habits, the way you reach for a screen when an emotion surfaces, the way you change the subject when the conversation gets real, the way you avoid your own reflection when you feel empty. And in those moments, you'll realize something powerful. You were never lazy, never broken, never behind. You were just buried, beneath distractions you didn't ask for, beneath expectations you didn't create, beneath a system that sold you comfort in exchange for your clarity, but you can reclaim it. Not all at once, not with a grand declaration, but slowly, quietly, intentionally. You start by noticing when you're reaching for distraction instead of presence, noticing when you're choosing convenience over truth, noticing when you're numbing instead of healing. And then, you pause, you breathe, you come back to your body, you come back to this moment, you come back to you, because no one is coming to rescue you from the noise. No one is going to pull you out of the fog. This is your awakening, and it begins the moment you choose to feel what you've been avoiding, to see what you've been ignoring, to live in a world that is constantly trying to sedate you without going numb. This is not a war for your time, this is a war for your soul. And the cost of losing isn't death, it's forgetting that you were ever alive. You've been told you're free, that you live in a society built on liberty, on self-expression, on individuality. But freedom isn't measured by the absence of chains. It's measured by how safe you feel being yourself. So ask yourself, when you speak your truth, do you feel free, or do you feel fear? When you deviate from the norm, does the world support you? Or does it tighten around you, like a noose made of glances, whispers, and silent rejections? The system doesn't need to chase you down or beat you into submission. It's far more efficient than that. It's built a network of psychological pressure points that ensure you stay in place without force. It rewards obedience with comfort and acceptance. It punishes authenticity with isolation, ridicule, and emotional exile. You don't need a cell when the fear of rejection keeps you in line. You don't need to be silenced when you've already learned which parts of yourself are unwelcome. It begins early. You learn to suppress your wildness, your strangeness, your questions, not because someone hits you, but because someone looks at you like you're wrong, or laughs, or ignores you, or pulls away just enough for you to feel that icy gap, and it hurts. So you adapt, you shapeshift, you mold yourself into something more acceptable, more predictable, more likable. You get praised for being agreeable. You get included for following the script, and slowly, without even realizing it, you become a version of yourself built not on truth, but on survival. That's not freedom, that's psychological conditioning, and it doesn't just happen in childhood. It follows you into every space you enter. Try walking into a room and telling people you don't watch the news. Watch the reaction. Try saying you don't care about celebrity culture, or that you'd rather sit in silence than scroll. Try telling your friends you don't drink anymore, or that you're not chasing money, or that you don't agree with the accepted narrative. See how quickly the temperature changes. You're not being attacked, you're being frozen out. That's how the system protects itself. Not by debate, but by emotional consequence. Step outside the boundaries, and you feel it immediately. The discomfort, the tension, the subtle sense that you've violated an unspoken rule. And most people retreat. Not because they're weak, but because they're human. We're wired for connection. We want to belong. And the system knows that. It doesn't need to punish you when your own need for acceptance will do it for them. The people around you become enforcers without knowing it. Friends, family, co-workers, not because they're malicious, but because they're programmed too. They're stuck in the same loop. They've made peace with the script, and seeing you deviate from it threatens that peace. Your authenticity becomes a mirror they didn't ask to look into, and sometimes the only way they know how to respond is to push the mirror away. So you shrink a little, you stay quiet, you laugh at things that don't feel funny, you nod when you want to scream, you share opinions that aren't yours, not to lie, but to survive. Because the backlash doesn't come from institutions, it comes from people you love, from people you need, from people whose approval you've been taught to seek. And so the system doesn't have to correct you. Your own relationships do the job. That's not connection. That's compliance, disguised as community. And the cost? It's high, because every time you betray yourself to maintain the peace, a part of you dies, not dramatically, quietly, a slow erosion. You stop trusting your instincts. You doubt your inner voice. You start editing your thoughts before they even become words. And one day, you realize you don't know who you are anymore, only who you've learned to be for others. The system thrives on that confusion. It wants you chasing identity like a product, something you can buy, follow, wear, or brand. But identity isn't a costume, it's a frequency. And when you're tuned into your true frequency, you can't be controlled. That's why authenticity is dangerous. It's disruptive. It's contagious. One person living their truth can destabilize an entire illusion. That's why it's punished so subtly, not with violence, but with discomfort. Enough to make you second guess, enough to make you pull back. But here's the truth they don't want you to see. The backlash is a sign you're on the right path. If your truth shakes the room, then the room was never built to hold you. If your voice makes people uncomfortable, maybe they needed to be uncomfortable. Because comfort isn't the goal, alignment is, and alignment often requires disturbance. The system doesn't want alignment, it wants obedience. It wants you to question yourself, not the structure. It wants you to internalize your discontent and call it personal failure. It wants you to believe that if you're anxious, tired, or lost, the problem is you, so you medicate, you overwork, you numb, you keep trying to fix a soul wound with surface solutions. And it never works. Because the wound isn't personal, it's collective. You were never broken, you were responding to a sick system, and now you're waking up to that. That's why the backlash feels louder. Because you're no longer numb to it. you're starting to feel how much of your life has been shaped by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of being alone. But fear is not truth, it's a mechanism, and once you see it for what it is, you start to move differently. You stop seeking approval from those who benefit from your silence. You stop shrinking to fit into rooms that were never built for your truth. You stop apologizing for your frequency. And yes, it might cost you. Some connections will fall away, some opportunities will dissolve, some paths will close, but the ones that remain, they'll be real. They'll be rooted in truth, not performance. They'll nourish you, not drain you, and they'll remind you that freedom isn't about being liked, it's about being aligned. You don't need everyone to understand you, you just need to stop abandoning yourself. Because the system only works if you agree to play your role. And the moment you stop playing, the moment you reclaim your voice, your rhythm, your sovereignty, the illusion weakens. Not just for you, but for everyone watching. And someone is watching. Someone who's tired. Someone who's quiet. Someone who's waiting for permission to be real. And when they see you stand in your truth, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, even when it hurts, they'll remember something they'd forgotten. And just like that, the system loses one more mind, one more soul, one more light that won't be dimmed. And that's how it crumbles, not with noise, but with one awakened spirit at a time. He wasn't hallucinating, he wasn't paranoid, and he most definitely wasn't crazy. He was simply awake, and in a world that runs on illusions, being awake is the most dangerous thing you can be. What Wheeler saw wasn't a fantasy, it was the architecture behind the curtain, a silent, calculated structure built to control, distort, and ultimately erase the deeper truth of human consciousness. They say he started acting strange. They say his behavior became erratic. But what else would you expect from someone who stumbled onto a reality no one is supposed to see? Not because it's complicated, but because it's hidden in plain sight. Because if the public ever saw what he saw, even a glimpse of it, everything would unravel. The stories, the systems, the safety, the illusion. Wheeler didn't lose his mind, he cracked the code. And they knew it. He had spent years behind the scenes, inside the very places where agendas are shaped and decisions are made that never reach the surface of public knowledge. He was trusted, he had access. And that access allowed him to see the connections, not just between politics and policy, but between technology, biology, psychology, and something deeper, something spiritual. He began noticing the patterns. Small, at first, like whispers in static, names that kept reappearing, quiet policies inserted into unrelated documents, research projects buried under humanitarian labels that had nothing to do with humanity at all. He started to see that the war wasn't just about territory, or economics, or power. It was about frequency, consciousness, the ability to think independently, the ability to feel freely. And he realized this war wasn't coming. It was already here. The invisible war had been waging for decades, ever quietly, methodically, beneath the awareness of the public. It wasn't fought with bullets. It was fought with narratives, with distractions, with frequencies, with invisible leashes tied to your attention and your biology. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. He documented everything, every strange file, every anomalous pattern, every sudden policy change that aligned perfectly with what he had started to call the suppression grid. He wrote down everything, pieced it together, and for a while, he thought, maybe he was the only one who saw it. Maybe he was alone, until he wasn't. That's when the pressure started. People he once trusted began to distance themselves. Conversations grew colder. Meetings he was supposed to attend were suddenly rescheduled without him. Subtle things, easily explainable, until they weren't. His personal life began to erode. His energy started to feel drained, even when he was doing nothing. He described moments of disorientation, as if something was pressing in on his thoughts, clouding them, like a fog that had no physical source. And that's when he realized the war wasn't just external, it was personal. They weren't just watching him, they were targeting him, because he had touched the signal. He had found something in the data, 1912, a thread that led to what he believed was the core frequency used to influence large-scale populations. Not just through media, not just through fear, but through resonance, fields that were being used to entrain the nervous system, to keep people docile, distracted, numb. He believed that if the frequency could be isolated and disrupted, the spell could be broken. People could wake up, not just spiritually, but physically, psychologically. He wasn't chasing theories. He had data, maps, coordinates, timelines, but every time he got closer, something pushed back. People vanished, files were erased, surveillance intensified, friends turned to strangers, and then he disappeared. What happened next was exactly what always happens. The narrative was rewritten. They said he broke, that the pressure got to him, that it was a tragic ending to a brilliant career. But those who knew him best, those who had read his journals, seen his charts, felt the fire in his words, they knew better. He didn't break, he broke through. And the moment he did, they made sure his voice wouldn't carry. But fragments of what he discovered still exist. Pieces, scattered evidence, unfinished documents, declassified reports that corroborate exactly what he feared. Not conspiracy, not delusion. Just truth, covered in layers of disbelief. He had uncovered something that pointed to an ancient architecture, a blueprint that tied modern control systems to ancient rituals of energy manipulation. Techniques once used by hidden orders, now replicated through technology, through data, through light, through sound. He believed that modern society was the updated version of an ancient containment system, and the moment he saw it, they saw him. You were never supposed to know what he discovered, because what he found would force you to question everything you've accepted as real, your thoughts, your emotions, your desires. What if they weren't fully yours? What if they had been gently steered since birth by systems too subtle to fight and too normalized to resist? The war he described wasn't fought on battlefields. It was fought in the subconscious, in the dream world, in the language of belief and identity. And he knew that once the human spirit remembered what it was, those systems would collapse, not through violence, but through remembrance. He wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to wake it up, and for that, they erased him. But here's the thing about truth. It never fully disappears. It lingers, it echoes, it finds new vessels, new voices. You, me, anyone who hears the quiet hum beneath the surface of reality and starts to ask, what is this? Really? What he saw wasn't a theory. It wasn't madness. It was the system, a system built on loops, on control, on the suppression of the human soul's natural frequency. And that system is still running, right now, around you, through you. But his work wasn't in vain, because every time you question the narrative, you continue it. Every time you feel the numbness and choose to stay present anyway, you break it. Every time you remember there is more to this life than the loop you were handed, you crack open the field. He paid the price so you wouldn't have to, so you could see what he saw without disappearing, so you could speak it, share it, live it. And if you're reading this now, if something inside you is stirring, then you've already been touched by the signal he tried to reveal. And you're not crazy, you're becoming aware. It's easy to overlook because it's all around you. The glitching attention spans, the emotional numbness, the epidemic of anxiety, depression, disconnection, the imagery, it's become so common that you've started to accept it as just the way things are. You hear people joke about being too tired to care, about feeling dead inside, about how impossible it is to focus. You laugh along, you nod, you scroll past the memes, thinking you're just part of a stressed-out generation. But what if that's the trick? What if the collapse of your inner world isn't an accident, but the result of something deeper, something deliberate? What if the very symptoms you've normalized are actually signs of a program running beneath the surface? A program designed not to empower you, but to hollow you out. You've been told it's just modern life. Too much tech, too little time. A fast-paced world. But when you step back, when you really look, a different pattern starts to emerge. One that feels less like chaos and more like choreography. Mental illness is exploding. That's not an opinion, it's statistical fact. Anxiety disorders, depression, panic attacks, emotional breakdowns, all rising. But not in some small subset of people. across the board. The question no one seems to ask is, why now? If we're more connected than ever, if we have more access to information, community, health resources, and self-care tools than any generation in history, why do we feel worse? Why is joy harder to reach? Why do we feel like we're living under a blanket of static, even when everything appears to be functioning? Because what you're experiencing isn't dysfunction. It's intentional design. You were born into a world that has slowly and silently shifted from organic to synthetic, from spontaneous to programmed. Your natural cycles have been overwritten. Your attention, the single most powerful tool of your consciousness, has been fragmented, divided, and sold. Your nervous system is constantly being triggered, poked, pulled into high alert by devices and systems designed to keep you in a state of agitation or sedation, depending on what benefits the machine that day. That emotional flatlining you feel, the numbness, that's not a flaw in the system. That's what it was designed to create. Because a numb population doesn't ask questions. A numb mind doesn't rebel. It doesn't reach for the stars. It doesn't awaken dormant faculties of perception. It follows, it consumes, it exists, but it doesn't live. You were engineered into this state. Look at the patterns. Shorter and shorter content, constant scrolling, endless feeds that never satisfy. Each swipe promising stimulation but delivering emptiness. It's not a mistake. The architecture is intentional. It's meant to override your natural rhythms, your sense of depth, curiosity, attention span. You're being trained to exist in fragments, no long thoughts, no inner stillness, just dopamine loops and surface engagement. Why? Because depth is dangerous. Depth leads to insight. Insight leads to change. And change threatens the very system that relies on your predictability. So they overwhelm you, not with brutality, but with volume. With constant pings, updates, options. Too much to process. Too fast to resist. Your mind, your body, your soul, constantly reacting, never resting. And so, you flatline. You call it burnout. But it's not just from overwork, it's from overstimulation without integration. Your nervous system was never designed to handle this much signal, this much contradiction, this much energetic noise, and the system knows that. It's counting on it, because as long as you're overwhelmed, you won't stop to ask why. Why you've lost the ability to sit in silence, why you reach for your phone the second you feel uncomfortable, why you feel like a ghost inside your own life. These aren't isolated personal issues. These are the symptoms of a much larger spiritual dislocation, MCUs, a separation from your natural state of consciousness. And it's been done slowly, quietly, wrapped in convenience and comfort. The medications, the distractions, the hyper-curated personas, the over-prescribed fixes, they all point to one thing, the society that doesn't want you to heal, but to cope, to patch the holes, to keep functioning, because functioning means producing, it means consuming, it means keeping the machine alive, but healing, real healing, that would mean stopping, looking, feeling, questioning, and the moment you do that, the illusion begins to fracture, because the truth has never been hidden, it's been everywhere, right in front of you, in the way you feel drained by your own lifestyle, in the fact that joy feels like a memory instead of a reality, in the way you've had to fake being okay, not because you're weak, but because the world won't hold space for anything else. You're not broken, you're reacting to a broken system, and the more sensitive you are, the more deeply you feel it. Because sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's a compass, and if you've been feeling everything too much, the dissonance, the chaos, the quiet grief of pretending, that's not weakness, that's awakening. That's your soul refusing to normalize what is inherently unnatural. Engineered decay isn't loud, it's subtle. It looks like convenience, it sounds like progress, it feels like disconnection, and it doesn't show up in headlines. It shows up in your body, in your spirit. In the moments when you wonder if this is really all there is, that question, that soft, persistent discomfort, is the beginning of remembrance. Because deep down, under all the conditioning, all the programming, all the emotional fatigue, you remember something else. You remember how it's supposed to feel. You remember clarity, stillness, presence, joy without a reason, meaning without a metric. And that memory is dangerous to the system, because the more people remember, the less they obey. The more people slow down, the more they begin to see, and the more they see, the less they can be controlled. That's why the system doesn't hide the truth in vaults or locked rooms. It hides it in plain sight, beneath your nose, in your habits, in your everyday routines. Because if it can convince you that this numb, fragmented, overstimulated state is normal, then you'll never go looking for anything more. But if you do, if you dare to step outside the pattern, to question the fatigue, to reclaim your presence, then everything begins to change. The static starts to clear, the fog begins to lift, and what you see on the other side isn't just a broken system. It's the truth that you were never meant to be this tired. You were never meant to be this disconnected. You were never meant to live in survival mode, walking through a dream that isn't yours. You were meant to wake up, and the moment you do, you stop being the product. You become the revolution. Now that you see it, you can't pretend it's not there. The grid, the field, the invisible structure that's been wrapped around your consciousness since the moment you were born. You feel it now, don't you? That silent tension behind every thought, that faint resistance every time you try to slow down, question, or feel. It was always there. But now, for the first time, you can name it. And the moment you see it clearly, you arrive at the one question they've spent everything trying to keep you from asking. I none. Now that I know, what will I do? This is the moment they fear. Not the protests, not the shouting, not the hashtags or slogans. This quiet, internal confrontation. This choice point. Because this is where the real war begins. Not out there, but in here. Between the version of you that was manufactured to survive the system and the one that came here to dismantle it just by remembering who you are. You've been taught to believe that you're powerless, that you're small, that you're one person in a chaotic world too complex to influence. You've been programmed to default to despair, to believe that all the big levers are out of reach, and that you should just do your best to stay comfortable, distracted, entertained. But that's the lie. The real program isn't designed to make you obey. It's designed to make you forget you ever had a choice. But you do, right now. You can stay dead, or you can wake up. And yes, that's what you've been. Dead. Not in body, but in spirit. Walking, talking, working, moving. But without the spark that once made you feel alive. You've known it for a while. That dull ache in your chest. That strange hollowness in moments that should have been meaningful, that quiet sense that life has become a series of reactions instead of a conscious creation. It didn't happen all at once, it was gradual. A million small agreements you didn't realize you were making. Agreeing to stay silent, agreeing to suppress, agreeing to abandon yourself for the sake of approval, safety, survival. And every time you made one of those unconscious choices, a part of you faded, not gone forever, just asleep. But here's the secret. That part of you, it never stopped waiting. It's still there, watching, listening, ready. The system works because it's subtle. It doesn't scream at you. It whispers just enough doubt to make you abandon your own knowing. It rewards you for compliance, punishes you for intuition. But it can only shape the version of you that doesn't remember. Because once you remember, it can't touch you. That's what they don't want you to realize. That awareness itself is rebellion. That your presence, your clarity, your ability to witness the program without merging with it is the escape hatch. You don't have to fight it. You don't have to dismantle every piece of it. You just have to stop participating unconsciously. Silence now is complicity, not the silence of meditation, not the silence of inner peace, but the silence of pretending, the silence of looking away when you know, of shrinking back when you feel the truth rise in your chest, of laughing along with a world that keeps making jokes out of trauma, pain, and disconnection. That silence is a form of death, and you've done it for too long. But you can speak now, even if it's only in whispers. You can listen now, even if your mind resists it. You can choose now, even if your hands still shake. They want you to think the world is too far gone, that your awakening is pointless, that everything's collapsing and there's nothing left to save. But that's just another layer of the illusion. Because the moment you awaken in spite of the noise, the programming loses its grip. The loop cracks. The field shakes. You don't have to be loud to disrupt the system. You just have to be clear. Clear in your energy, clear in your presence, clear in your refusal to remain numb. Remember this: you are not here to be controlled. You are here to remember. You are not here to fit into the architecture. You are here to feel your way out. And once you start to feel again, deeply, fully, without apology, you begin to undo everything the system has built to keep you asleep. The numbness fades, the fog lifts, the fear dissolves. Not because life becomes easy, but because it becomes yours again. You are not powerless. You were simply taught to forget where your power lives. It doesn't live in your job title, your followers, your productivity, your resume, your appearance. It lives in your ability to choose presence over programming, truth over comfort, alignment over approval. It lives in your breath, in your stillness, in your intuition. It lives in your remembering. And every time you choose that, every time you catch yourself mid-distraction and return to the now, you win a small battle in the quiet war that has been raging beneath reality. The world won't reward you for waking up, but it will begin to reorganize around you. Not instantly, not obviously, but deeply. People will shift. Events will shift. Your health, your clarity, your capacity to love and create and speak truth will expand. Because you'll no longer be living someone else's life, you'll be living yours. But make no mistake, this isn't a one-time choice. It's a daily remembering. Because the grid will keep humming, the distractions will keep calling, the fog will return in waves. That's what it does. But now, now you can see it. And that sight is your freedom. No one can take that from you now. Not unless you hand it back. So ask yourself, what are you really choosing? To stay dead, comfortable, compliant, controlled, or to wake up, uncomfortable, awake, untouchable? Because that's what you become when you remember who you are. Untouchable. Not in the physical sense, but in the deeper one. They can drain your bank account, shadow ban your truth, laugh at your voice, but they cannot unawake you. Once you wake up, you see the strings, you see the actors, you see the design, and more importantly, you see the path out. So here it is. The path is presence. The path is remembrance. The path is yours. Choose.